Maidstone Radio, Community Focus.
Hello there, my name's Joe Cooper and my guest today is none other than the head of women's and girls football at Maidstone United Football Club, John Jackson. How you doing today, John?
I'm very well, thank you, Joe, and thank you for having me on.
Not a problem at all. So the reason I've brought you on today is because obviously it's been a crazy year for football, for sport, for everyone in general, but now the controversy of the European Super League has just thrown everything up in the air again, just when it was starting to look like the world was on its way back. Now, obviously the situation has changed over the coming days, and teams are saying that, we're leaving and all this, but apparently due to what the president of the new European Super League has said, they can say they're leaving, but they are contracted to stay. So what is your opinion on what's gone on here, John?
Well, for me, it was one of shock, I think, like a lot of fans. And I think before I sort of go further on that, I'll approach this, if I may, from sort of two perspectives. One, my own personal opinion as a football fan, and two, coming from the head of the women and girls section at Maidstone United, which is very much a part of the local community. We are a part of the community section of Maidstone United. So how it would likely possibly impact on us. Okay, from a personal point of view, like yourself, as you say, we've come out at the end of a year which is sort of totally unprecedented. And it's almost like sort of chaos theories. Things seem to come out of those areas of time when something has changed drastically. I think Naomi Klein wrote a book, The Shock Doctrine, where everything can be changed at times of a crisis. And it looks, I suppose, if I look at it cynically, it looks as though you could say some powerful people within the game sought to use this crisis that we are currently experiencing as a way of moving forward a plan that they developed, which would make their lot a whole lot better, enrich themselves. I think a lot of what fans' fury is vented at is the fact that this seems to be a money and a power grab at the expense, by a very few, at the expense of the whole of football. So looking at it from a personal perspective, that was the first thing that sort of struck me about it, and it came out of nowhere. The thing that I feel at this moment slightly uneasy about is I'm delighted that the football family and the football community in general came together and put aside any sort of tendencies of tribalism to unite with one voice that said, this is wrong. I feel in the UK, in Britain, we have this inherent sense of fairness that tends to run through us, and sportsmanship, and we often love the underdog. And I think that has been part of what has galvanised us together. Also, I think the reporting on it from those within football has been very good, because it seems to have come as an honest kind of reporting without bias that's given us all of the information, or as much as the information that could have been provided to us in order for us to make an opinion and arrive at that. The personal concern, I'm very glad that we've done that and we've stood up, and it looks like we've got to a point where people have realised maybe they've overplayed their hand. And on that, the reason I choose that phrase is because, like a lot of others, I don't think this is entirely over. I don't think this is the end of the story because of the vast amounts of money that are involved here, because of the threat of litigation, locking some people in, or potentially locking some people in. I think that this will run for a while yet, and I think I would not be surprised were it to come back in a slightly different form. And two reasons for that, just to finish on that point, is that because of the money that's involved, and because that some clubs may be locked into this, but also, of course, because there is still a general unhappiness from some of the big clubs with regards to the changes that have been made or are being proposed to be made to the way that the Champions League operates. It seems that some of the big clubs wanted, and I get the impression that some of the big clubs wanted to take more revenue from it and to, have a greater say in it. But now it's been proposed to include more clubs. Some of them are now saying, well, that's far too many games. So there seems to be a conflict within that. So I think this still has mileage left in it. And we need to be very aware and very alert that this isn't a done deal.
Completely agree with you. I just want to know your opinion, John, on obviously the Super League has been designed, let's be honest, to line people's pockets. These owners' pockets. They say it's for the fans. They say that they want people to see the best players of all time playing against each other. And now UEFA have come out and said this is our new reform for the Champions League, which obviously will involve more teams. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it means that every team will get at least 10 games. Now, if you go into a season like the Premier League, you're playing 38 games, plus maybe a cup run in either the FA Cup or the Carabao Cup, and also if you're skilled enough to get into a European competition, if you're a starting 11 player who is vital to the team, you will be exhausted. You will play a ridiculous amount of football. And do you think that in the design for this Super League, do you think they've put any time into the thought of the players' welfare?
That's a very interesting point. And I think back, you'll hear some players, maybe from a bygone era, and some supporters from a bygone era, will often say, oh, well, I remember the players. They used to play 50, 60 games a season, and after every game, they'd be down the pub and, they would smoke and, and I completely agree with that. And I watched a lot of that football. And the game has undoubtedly moved on from there. I mean, we had players who wanted for major games playing literally on pain-killing injections. And, pain is nature's way of telling you that something's wrong. And we know that players today will often play on with a niggle. In fact, from speaking to professionals, semi-professionals, and physios involved at clubs, I'm told that it's very rare that a player goes out, 100% fit today. And part and parcel of that is undoubtedly the pressures that are put on them to compete week in, week out. The game relies on them. It raises revenue, and tickets are sold, and TV rights are sold, not based on how well put together the business package is, but how well those players play on the pitch. So the ones who are at the peak of the game are always required to be there. You'll get a fan that will go to a game maybe, and for instance, in the days when Eden Hazard was at Chelsea, if you went to a Chelsea match, if Eden Hazard was unavailable on the day, you'd be disappointed because you were missing out on what maybe be considered the star attraction. It's like going to the theatre and seeing something and the lead actor, is replaced on that day by an eminently capable understudy, but it's not who you wanted to see. And football is, as much as a business, obviously it's an entertainment industry as well. So there's that. The pressures on players to constantly play. Now, moving on to today, players are they're always playing on the very edge. They're expected to give everything in every game. They're at the highest levels of the game, they are super athletes where any tiny little advantage might be enough to win you the game or take the game. So they're always running the risk of that hamstring injury because, they are so fit, they are so home, they are so tight. So increasing the number of games obviously puts more pressure on that. Now, does that benefit the bigger clubs who can have deeper squads? Undoubtedly, that's merely common sense. So it will put additional pressures on those top players. That will be alleviated undoubtedly for clubs at the higher level who can have a stronger bench. The Chelseas, the Manchester Cities of this world. Forgive me for those that I haven't mentioned. I'm just using those as an example. Have the owners considered that in putting together proposals, or have UEFA considered that in putting together these proposals? I'd like to think it's been a consideration, but the fact that even the top clubs, those who are most likely to be able to take on board these additional games due to the depth of their squads, they are the ones now sort of apparently or seemingly leading the campaign that's complaining about this and the additional strains that it's going to have on them. So what would it do for clubs who may manage to get there due to the fact that it's an open competition, who aren't as well equipped? Maybe I'm thinking of, I don't know, and with every respect, a club like Leicester City that might get in there. Would they be as well prepared? Would they have the strength in depth to be able to manage that additional competition? And I mean no disrespect to them. As a neutral, maybe I would love to see Leicester City get in there and shake everything up, because it proves that can be done in much the same way when they won the Premier League. It gives hope to everyone. But would that be even more of a strain on a club that possibly doesn't have a bench that's as strong as a club like Man City, Chelsea, potentially Manchester United, Liverpool, or a club like that?
Definitely. I mean, look at Liverpool this year. They went from champions of England. They basically, everybody knew they were going to win the league at December. They were that good. They've come into this season. They have an injury to Van Dijk. They have 3 or 4 injuries after that. Their season is in turmoil.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, because, of course, the other thing that we had as well was a shortened close season, which obviously is going to have an effect. But also, coming back to the earlier question there, Liverpool play an incredibly high intensity game, even amongst the teams at the top. I think what Jurgen Klopp likes to call heavy metal football.
That's it,
and
yeah.
It's very intense. So those pressures are possibly even greater upon them than a team that may play a slightly different version of the game, such as maybe Manchester City, who rely heavily on possession. That's not to say that they don't work very, very hard. Of course, they do. All of the players do. But it's interesting to note that Liverpool have had this many injuries with the type of game they play. Is it a coincidence? I don't know. I'd like to see some work that's being done on that. The shorter close season, the players weren't allowed to recharge their batteries again. Now you take that and put that in, and you then add the additional and extra games, and there is a potential for a real problem physiologically for those star players, undoubtedly. And I think it would be useful to see some additional studies done on this, which could then be used to present to UEFA to say, well, hold on a minute, this isn't, doesn't assist us from the point of view of player welfare.
Definitely. I remember there was a film called Concussion. I don't know if you've seen it, where Will Smith plays a doctor and he analyses concussions in the NFL in America. And now, amongst the fans, I believe he's not met with the kindest of criticisms, because this is a film based on real life, because the league had to completely reanalyse the tackling. And in football, could that be talked about as well? Some of the tackles that get flown in, the amount of games, the strain it'll have on their legs. I'm sure if you keep pulling your hamstrings, ripping your hamstrings, destroying your ankles, destroying your knees, a lot of these players will have difficulty walking when they're older.
Well, again, another interesting point. 2 or 3 issues within that. Yes, you're quite right with regards to the levels, and as we've already said, athletes, professional athletes like the football players are playing at the edge of their performance levels consistently over extended periods of time, week after week after week, and that is an element of risk which we've always known about within sports. And because at this moment in time we have the kind of technical knowledge and the ability to understand how to get the best out of a human body physiologically, that is now being brought to bear within the world of sport to give teams, individual athletes, an edge. And of course, when you're always operating at the very edge, it's a very fine line to going too far and beyond that and getting injuries and damage. That's the first thing within that. And professional sports people accept that. They understand that. They have very regimented, not only training programs, but of course diets. That all changed, with, I think the Italians brought a lot of that into the game,
Yes.
in the 80s and 90s, where all of that changed around nutrition and everything. I mean, even at the level that our women's team are playing at, which is, effectively a high level at grassroots, really, in reality, they are all very much aware and are into nutrition and making sure that they have pre-match meals. And now, with regards to head injury, that is something that has, of course, come into football in this country.
Definitely.
We've been made aware of it around Jeff Astle, the former West Brom player, and the foundation there. And but the lead on this came from America, the United States, where children, I believe, under the age of 11 were banned from heading the ball. And we now have that here as a guideline within us, within the FA and within our younger age groups. We do not coach and we do not encourage heading the ball below under the age of under 12. If it occurs naturally, it happens. But we would not run heading practices or heading drills. We don't encourage that at all because of the research that has been done into head injury. So even at the lower age, at the younger age group, we're already aware of that from the point of view of the development and the safeguarding of players.
I think it's an issue that will stand the test of time, player welfare. The Super League, I agree with you. I think it could go on for much, much longer. And say, worst case scenario, it goes ahead. For a team like Maidstone United, you've mentioned to me before how proud you are. You're part of the community, and you're helping these young men and women, boys and girls, to become better footballers, better people, making sure they're training right, their diet right. Could you just expand a bit more on what Maidstone United does for the Maidstone community and how the Super League could harm that in the sense of the football pyramid?
That's the beauty of the game as we have it here, and I think what supporters have, in my opinion, quite rightly voiced their concerns about and their opposition to, is because all of the football is interrelated. Now, it may seem very, very different when we see a 6 or 7 year old taking their first steps on a little tiny, football pitch, maybe playing 4v4 in complete, abandonment. This release of being able to run around with the ball. They're not thinking about tactics or technique or anything. I was a coaching session that we run for our Wildcats, which are very young girls, yesterday evening, and just seeing the joy as they run around is amazing. But that session is partly funded through the FA for us, so we can keep the costs down and provide that as a service within the community via Maidstone United. If the FA doesn't receive that revenue from the Premier League because that revenue has been taken elsewhere, they cannot provide that revenue to us. We then may need to find another way to get that revenue. In a situation like we're coming out of at the moment, a global pandemic where businesses have been, very hit hard, they're not always able to provide the kind of generous sponsorship that they do within the community that they have previously done. They're looking at saving their jobs and saving the jobs of their workforce and protecting them, safeguarding their business. So that revenue stream may also then be sort of cut off a little bit. So you can see how the money that would be filtered away to a select small group who have complete control of that would then not filter down through the pyramid to those very, very young children within the community taking their first steps. So it has a very real link between what happens at the ESL and what we as a club, Maidstone United, want to do within the community. And obviously within Maidstone United's senior first men's team, the first part of this season was funded through the government giving assistance via the Football Foundation and the FA that allowed our club to play games for their season to continue behind closed doors so that the pyramid can continue. Now, that stopped late on when the revenue sort of dried up a little bit. But the revenue was there initially. Now, would that be the case? Were money being sucked out of the game that is filtering down the pyramid? Would that still be the case? Were that being controlled by these few powerful individuals at the top?
It's fascinating when obviously a lot of people say that they don't want these big teams going just because they don't want to see those footballers go. They don't want the shake-up of the league, and we do need them for the money. But it's very interesting to read into the effect it will have lower down, like you were saying with the FA. Would they continue to help you?
Would
Who
they? It would
knows?
be a case of would they have the resources? Would they lose
Yeah.
huge amounts of resources? And let's be clear and be honest here.
Mm.
As we've said before, football is entertainment. Yeah, and that's the key to its popularity. Yeah, but it's
Mm.
also about community. It's also about a sense of belonging. It's also about history. It's also about all of that that's gone previously. And you'll often hear players, very astute players, and managers saying, I'm here for a period of time while I'm employed, but one day I'll be gone. But the fans will still be here and the club will still be here. And this is the thing that we need to protect and we need to keep at its heart. And conversely to that, of course, football is also a business. And, we know as Maidstone fans, we know as members of the Maidstone football community that Maidstone has had a checkered history when it comes to, the way it's been financially managed and situations that have befallen it, the club dropping out of the league previously, the long road back from the wilderness, as it were, the vision of the owners, Oliver Ash and Terry Casey, and drive of Bill Williams and the managers that we've had coming back in to build this club, to bring it back home to Maidstone, to give it back to the fans, putting them, long hours and their money in, their hands in their pockets for their money. But it has to be, and what they've done is they've made sure that it is managed financially prudently, and it's going to be run as a long-term entity. We're not going to go out and borrow huge amounts of money to deliver something that is unsustainable, because if we do that, we may have a very successful season, but then we may lose everything. And this is about the long term, for the community, for the fans, for the people. And that's been a really, really positive thing. But again, as we know, we've been affected as the club by that limit on resources that could be passed down. So, and because of this pandemic situation, and that then opens up that debate and that question with relation to the ESL. If that small group are entirely in control of huge amounts of revenue, how would that then benefit those down the chain? And I'm not saying entirely that it may not be. What I'm saying is the way it's been delivered and the way it's been developed and shown thus far, it would seem to me that it doesn't, especially if you're pulling up the drawbridge to prevent the level of competition that enables anybody to join you. If it becomes a private members club rather than, an open competition where anybody can aspire, achieve, and get to the very pinnacle. Sheffield United has been a wonderful story over the last few seasons. Bournemouth prior to that. Sadly, they've both been relegated, but wonderful stories of teams coming from those lower divisions, coming all the way through and making it right the way through to the Premiership. When I first started supporting football, there was no direct route between what is, the non-league, as we call it, and the league. You could get to the very pinnacle of the non-league, and year on year you would be refused entry into the Football League based on any number of criteria. Whilst there are certain criteria you have to fulfill, and quite rightly now, that isn't the case. It is a pathway, it is a pyramid that is open to all. Yeah, and that is something that fans appreciate. That is something that our inherent sense of fair play, I believe, as a nation is very important to us. And for me, it's why football is not only the beautiful game, it's also the people's game.
Well said. I think you've raised some very interesting points today, John. I know that I will definitely think further on them, and I hopefully our listeners will as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, John.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on, Joe. I hope I haven't offended supporters of any other clubs.
I'm sure you haven't.
Best wishes and best luck to all those clubs. I'd also like to say I'm very glad that those owners of those 6 clubs did take the time and step back. Whether they were forced or not, I'm going to recognise the fact that they did it, and I'm going to say to them from a personal perspective, and I'm keeping my eye on you. And I hope everybody would do the same. I hope everybody would do the same. We all make mistakes. It's what you do to put it right. Let's see where you want to take this next. So we're all on our toes, and we're waiting for the ball to come back into play, and we'll make our decisions about our movement once we see where you're going to put the pass.
Well, there is our headline. I've got my eye on you. I like it. That's what will be written.
Thank you very much.
It's been absolutely no problem at all, John. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I wish you all the rest of the luck for the rest of the year. I hope you have a great start to the season. Next season, have a great pre-season this year as well. And I can't wait to go back down the Gallagher to watch some football.
That's brilliant, Joe. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you there. We'll see you there for some of the women's games too. They play on a
100%.
Sunday off. They play on a Sunday afternoon at the Gallagher Stadium, working very hard to develop that section. So at the moment, free to get in. So keep an eye on the website for that, updating the website soon with more information once we know what we can do. Thanks to all our sponsors, I'll say that too. Because without them, again, during a very sticky period, it's been very necessary to have people like Churchill Insurance and Whitehead Moncton and Europa Sports helping us out. We're very grateful to them. And finally, come on, you Stones.
Well said. Thanks, John.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Have a good day. Catch you again
too.
soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Maidstone Radio, community focus. Listen online, on smart speaker, and on your mobile phone. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Search for We Are Maidstone. Find us at wearemaidstone.com.